In the thick darkness cloaking the countryside where the Dupree family's ancient estate stood, the memory of that horrific night 2 years ago still carved like a dull blade through Martin's mind. It wasn't just a night of fear. It was a turning point with no way back, where he was forced to choose between truth and loyalty, between justice and blood. Beneath the dim glow of the attic lamp, as rain gently pattered on the old tiled roof, the ghosts of the past seemed to rise again with each beat of his heart. Martin hadn't been alone that night. Vernon, his powerful and cold uncle, and Anita, the woman who had once been the soul of the entire family, stood by him, not as loved ones, but as witnesses burdened with the same guilt. What they did or didn't do that night was something they'd spent 2 years burying under a facade of morality and false prestige. Recently, fragments of truth began surfacing from the mire of deceit. During the July 15th broadcast, a conversation between Martin and Vernon accidentally unveiled secrets they had once sworn to take to their graves. Vernon, with a voice laced in sarcasm and detachment, seemed too exhausted to hide anymore. He neither denied nor confirmed the suspicions. But one thing was clear, according to Vernon: Martin didn't kill out of personal motive. He was merely protecting someone else, his grandfather, from what appeared to be a hate crime incited by Kenny and his late brother. Kenny, with his polished appearance and fake smile, had long been a controversial figure in the community. Rumors about his extremist views and racist behavior were nothing new. But that night, he had appeared at the back gate of the Dupree estate, drunk, furious, and carrying a weapon that was never found. His target seemed clear: the elderly man, Martin's grandfather, who had once clashed with Kenny over racially charged land disputes. What happened next remains a chilling series of blanks no one dares to fill in. Someone fell. Blood was spilled, and a pact of silence was made in the dark. Martin never spoke the truth, partly out of loyalty, partly out of fear of being erased from the family that birthed him. But was that the whole reason? Or had Vernon and Bill, with their influence and manipulation, crafted an invisible cage around him, forcing his silence like a pawn sacrificed in a greater scheme? Vernon, as a senator, controlled not only the media but also the dense legal web surrounding the family. Bill, Martin's calculating and powerful father, though absent that night, always loomed over his son's decisions. Every step Martin had taken since his youth had been under Bill's control, and that night may have been no exception. Nicole, the woman Martin once loved deeply, and the only person near the scene that night, had remained silent for 2 years. But recently, her behavior turned strange. Midnight phone calls, secretive visits to Vernon's law office, and a firm refusal to testify when approached by reporters. Nicole knew something, that much was undeniable. But why was she staying quiet? Was it to protect Martin, or to shield herself from another threat? And was her silence part of a dangerous exchange, where lives and secrets were bartered in the name of loyalty and betrayal? What the audience sees on screen is only the tip of the iceberg. Behind every frame lies a web of complex relationships, where seemingly righteous figures could become killers when cornered. Conversely, those like Kenny, once despised, might hold key pieces to completing the puzzle. In a shocking development, a freelance local journalist published an unreleased photo, showing Martin and Vernon standing outside the living room, both bloodstained. The image, allegedly taken just moments after the incident, was quickly taken down, but not before thousands had shared and saved it. It was a ticking time bomb under the Dupree legacy, and the media descended like vultures. Vernon, though outwardly composed like the seasoned politician he was, could not hide the cracks in his armor. He began avoiding live interviews, canceled press conferences, and was rarely seen publicly with Martin. Meanwhile, Martin sank deeper into isolation. His closest friends turned their backs. Scholarship foundations he had established came under scrutiny, and rumors swirled that he would soon be forced out of the very charitable organization he had spent a decade building. In the eye of this storm, Anita alone retained a strangely serene demeanor. Once hailed as the cultural and moral icon of the family, she appeared unshaken by the coming collapse. Sources claimed she possessed a copy of the estate's surveillance footage from that night. A clip never released, not out of fear, but because she was waiting for the right moment to play it as her trump card. Was she innocent, or was she maneuvering a long game, where the prize wasn't just Martin's survival but her own resurrection within the family's power hierarchy? As the past surged back like an undertow, eroding every layer of secrecy laid down over 2 years, one thing became clear. Someone was lying. And if the truth surfaced, it wouldn't just bury Martin. It would take down the entire Dupree family, who had lived too long in their self-made shadows. While Martin wrestled with the storm of the past, a new tide was quietly rising beneath the roof he once shared with Smitty, the man he loved, the man who once made him feel safe. Their bond, thought unshakable, began to crack under the weight of Martin's secrets. Smitty, ever patient and careful, had tried to uncover the truth through tenderness and logic. But all he got in return were half-promises and evasive glances. Silence didn't ease his anxiety. It only deepened his exclusion from a battle he should have shared. The breaking point came when Kenny, always cunning and inflammatory, began approaching Tyrell and Samantha. His sudden appearances near Tyrell's school, and his coincidental presence at a community event where Samantha performed, pushed Smitty beyond reason. Kenny wasn't just Martin's past threat. He was now an immediate danger to the children Smitty loved. Rage consumed him, wiping out all moral restraint. On a cold, rainy evening in an abandoned lot at the town's edge, Kenny arranged a final meeting under the guise of one last negotiation. True to form, Kenny demanded money in exchange for silence, taunting and threatening with increasing venom. But Martin, worn down by years of fear and guilt, could no longer hold his composure. The ghost of that night came roaring back. When Kenny stepped too close to Tyrell and Samantha, he touched the one wound Martin had never healed, the fear of losing family because of Unatone's sins. Words escalated to shouting, shouting to shoving. Then, no one could say exactly when, a sudden, brutal blow cracked through the rain. Kenny collapsed to the wet ground, motionless. Blood soaked into the earth, mixing with rainwater like a natural ritual of reckoning. Martin stumbled back, hands shaking. Smitty stood frozen. They didn't know who delivered the final strike. All they knew was that Kenny was dead. There had been no plan for a body, no script for a scuffle turned fatal. But there was no way back. Martin and Smitty now faced a deadly decision: confess or construct a new version of events. And as had always been the Dupree way, they chose silence as their weapon. They didn't hide the body. They didn't erase the evidence. But they didn't tell the whole truth either. When Jacob, the head investigator in Fairmont Crest, arrived following an anonymous tip, they claimed Kenny attacked first, that they acted in self-defense, that the blow was an accident. It all sounded plausible, if not for the tremor in Martin's voice and the tension in Smitty's jaw when pressed on the details. Jacob, who knew Martin better than anyone, seemed unconvinced, but with no evidence to contradict them, he had to let the legal process run its course. To the Dupree and Richardson families, the news of Kenny's death was another knife in their crumbling pride. Vernon responded by summoning attorneys, cutting off media contact, and ordering Martin to say nothing more. Bill Cold, practical Bill, asked only one question: "Does anyone else know?" When Martin didn't answer, Bill understood the war ahead, and that his own son would be its weakest link. Smitty was no longer the silent partner behind Martin. He had stepped into the shadows Martin once tried to shield him from. Now he was part of the sin, a cog in the same machine of lies he once condemned. Their love hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed. It was no longer pure or free, but forged in secrecy and blood. They didn't say it aloud, but both knew. From this moment on, innocence was no longer an option. Tyrell and Samantha remained unaware of the truth, but suspicion had begun to creep in. The glances, the offhand questions, the prolonged silences at dinner. Signs that once again, Martin and Smitty's world was nearing its breaking point. And this time, if it collapsed, they wouldn't just lose their honor, freedom, or lives, they would lose the children they fought to protect. But perhaps the most terrifying thought wasn't whether they had killed a man. It was whether, after everything, they were even still human, or if they had become something else entirely, shaped by power, vengeance, and survival, playing the same cursed game the Dupree family had mastered for generations, a game that now owned them body and soul. Vernon had always prided himself on being able to control any crisis with the cold precision of a seasoned politician, and Bill, with the mind of a wartime strategist, was his most trusted right hand in cleaning up the aftermath. When Kenny's death was confirmed, they didn't panic. On the contrary, both men acted as if they had anticipated this worst-case scenario long ago. The first thing they did was eliminate the possibility of handing Martin or Smitty over to justice. Not because they wanted to protect them, but because if Martin fell, the entire power structure tied to the Dupree name would collapse with him. It was Bill who proposed the plan to erase all traces. He didn't trust the legal self-defense argument to hold up long-term. With an adversary like Kenny, whose past was complicated but who was still a citizen of the state and a recent media darling due to his alleged connection to a past case, even the smallest misstep could be magnified, and Martin would undoubtedly become the scapegoat to appease public outrage. So, according to Bill, the only viable option was to turn Kenny into someone who no longer existed. As night once again descended on Fairmont Crest, Vernon initiated phase 1 of the plan. Reaching out to the forensics team and the deputy sheriff, both of whom had long been beneficiaries of Dupree family-funded foundations. An official order to pause the investigation was issued under the guise of reevaluating data. Meanwhile, Bill, leveraging his covert connections in the state civil registry system, began forging a new immigration file for Kenny, complete with documents, visas, even a falsified entry stamp into Mexico, where Kenny was now believed to have fled due to massive debts owed to multiple creditors along the West Coast. And it didn't stop there. Vernon oversaw the body disposal. A special team was hired from out of state, with no direct ties to the family, and brought in through the rear entrance of an abandoned greenhouse, land Bill had quietly acquired months prior under the name of a shell corporation. There, Kenny's corpse was processed with specialized chemicals, leaving no DNA, no soft tissue, only ash after being incinerated in an old industrial furnace once used for glassmaking. The murder weapon, a bloodied iron rod, was disassembled and its fragments scattered across 3 different states by contacts from Bill's logistics campaign days in Latin America. Kenny's social media accounts suddenly sprang back to life. A stream of AI-generated photos from old trips appeared, accompanied by captions like, "I'm tired of the madness in America. Time to disappear for good." It was a flawless narrative. Fake messages were sent to old friends. Anonymous emails delivered to local newspapers, all reinforcing the idea that Kenny had vanished of his own accord to escape mounting legal trouble. Vernon, ever meticulous, even planted random clues. A blurry gas station security video surfaced, showing a man resembling Kenny refueling a rusty truck near the border. The image was unclear. No face, no license plate, but it was enough to muddy the waters and stall any formal investigation. The local media, heavily influenced by backroom donors, quickly pivoted attention to another breaking arrest, and Kenny's name began to fade from headlines. Martin didn't know all the details, nor did he want to. He knew too well that once Vernon and Bill were in motion, everything would be handled in a way that made retreat impossible. Still, he felt increasingly detached from his own life, as if Kenny's death, whether accidental or not, had become just another game piece in the hands of those who pulled the strings. He was no longer a decision-maker, just a surviving fragment in a game he once thought he could control. Smitty was different. He felt sickened by the cold efficiency Vernon and Bill displayed. Kenny's death, what should have been an unfortunate accident, had been erased so cleanly it was as if the man had never existed. And worst of all, life simply went on. The school remained open. Samantha's concert took place as scheduled. Tyrell was praised in class for his speech on ethics and courage. Meanwhile, Martin and Smitty, 2 men who once believed they could build a family on forgiveness and love, could now only look at each other in silence, sharing a guilt that had no name and no escape. But no plan is ever flawless. Somewhere else in town, Jacob, the sharp, loyal police officer, still sensed that something wasn't right. There were details that didn't match. Repetitive statements. Tense expressions he knew all too well in Martin's eyes. Jacob hadn't acted yet. He hadn't said anything. But he was watching. And if he began digging, what Vernon and Bill had tried so desperately to bury might come back. Not Kenny's body, but the truth about that horrific night 2 years ago. A truth that, like a corpse never properly laid to rest, was bound to rise again.